So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Or as they say, top of the morning. It may come as a surprise to you, though we're husband and wife, and we have been together for 48 years, actually next month. This is the first time we've ever done this. The first time.
It might be the last.
And that's why I need your help. Because if this goes wrong, I'm sleeping on the couch. So this is not about me. This is about my wife and her story, as Charles said. And why we thought it was important to bring it to this ISGAP audience, first and foremost, is because the community from which my wife comes are known as the forgotten refugees. They're the refugees you never hear about. I dare say some of you may even be surprised to learn that there were as many as 850,000 Jewish refugees from 1948, the year of Israel's rebirth. And you may ask yourself now or later, gee, why haven't I heard about them? Did I miss the reports in the New York Times or the BBC or the UN resolutions? Or maybe there weren't any. And if there weren't any, you might ask yourself, why? A question that we still ask ourselves, why? By the way, David Bernstein, who is also here, is the child of Iraqi Jewish refugees. So already a second story, Libya and Iraq, and there are others, of course. So to my wife, Giulietta, as the first question, tell us about yourself, your family, your earliest memories of being born and raised in Libya.
Hi, everybody. I was born in 1951. Actually, 1951 historically is the year that Libya became independent from the British. Before that were the Italians. And I'm one of 8. We lived in Tripoli, but before that we lived in Misurata, which is this beautiful little town, the seaside, which nobody knew about, and it became famous only when the Libya started having problems, and if you heard the news, you say Masrata, but before that, nobody knew about. When we lived in Misurata, my family was the only Jewish family. Everybody left, and then by the time I was 8 years old, we went to live in Tripoli. What I always said is that I was always a second-class citizen, as a Jew and as a woman, but when you don't know better, you don't know better. So for us, for me and my 5 sisters and 2 brothers, we thought the rest of the world lived like that. And we were living more or less okay, knowing what we could do and what we couldn't do, knowing our borders, until 1967, when the war broke up in Israel.
Okay, let's not get to 67 yet.
Okay, so that's why he's interviewing me, because
And that's why I'm walking a tightrope here. Interrupt my wife, and but stay pre-67. By 1951, as you said, Libya became independent from the British. But by then, most of the Jews of Libya were not betting on Libya. They had left. Your family stayed. They were the minority who stayed.
Yes.
The majority of Jews left.
Absolutely.
Why did they leave, and why did your family stay?
Well, the reason my family stayed, to be honest, by the time I wanted to ask them, both my parents died, which is a good lesson for young people. Ask when the time, don't wait. And the interesting thing that my father was one of 9. And he and other two brothers was the only 3 out of 9 who stayed. The rest, they all basically escaped from Libya because we had a few pogroms, 1951, 1945,
And 1948.
and 1948. So every excuse they had, they will attack the Jews. What I want to say about Libya that I don't know how many people know is that Libya, it used to belong to the Berbers. I don't know. I think it's important for you to know. And Jews lived with the Berbers. So Jews lived in Libya before Libya became Libya and belonged to the Arabs. But anyway, the interesting thing about Libya is that Libya is 3 regions. Tripolitania, which had the capital Tripoli, Cyrenaica with Benghazi, and Fezzan. And the interesting thing, being raised there as a Jew, I was raised that the only friend we had were the blacks. And I always, as a child, had this incredible affiliation with blacks, which were black African, until I realized that what the blacks and the Jews had in common, that we were second class and they were treated as slaves. They were the slaves of the Libyans.
Arab-owned slavery existed in Libya until the 20th century. So, where were your points of interaction as a Jewish family, whether in Misurata or in Tripoli, with black Africans?
Well, we knew them. My mother adored them. And in fact, there is this funny story that my mother wouldn't let anybody babysit us unless they were blacks, because she believed that they were the only friends. And I remember once, as a children, while this person, Zarug, was babysitting us, we did something horrible to him. I don't even want to tell you, a prank. And when my mother came, he was so angry. And my mother, I never forget, I must have been 9, she told us, do you know, guys, that what you did was so horrible that if Zarug was not black, he would have killed you. To show you that the fear that we had in that country and what we were dealing with. Anyway, I need my driver to put me in the right road.
But when Libya became independent in 1951, they adopted a constitution. And the Constitution was a perfect Constitution. I mean, if you read it, full protection for all Libyans. You obviously don't remember 1951, but by age 6, 7, and 8, you already had a consciousness. Were Jews full citizens protected by the law? Was your family, which had lived for hundreds of years, were they actually citizens of Libya?
No, nobody had. We actually had.
When you say nobody, who?
The Jews, we always knew we were second class. As I told you, was accepted as a.
But what does that mean in practice?
Like you cannot vote, you cannot be in politics. If you open the business, over 50% you had to share it with an Arab. We had synagogues, but you had to be very careful. You cannot walk with a Magen David.
A Star of David.
Star of David. We went to Italian schools, and I always remember the geography book. They always arrived late from Italy because they had to go to every book, page by page, and remove the page where there was this little map of Israel. So you knew that you had to walk and live within these confines, which again, we thought was normal. I mean, normal. Our parents say, don't say that, don't do that, don't do that. We knew that if somebody attacked you in the street, you don't rebel. As women, it's even worse, because you know they will come, they will touch your breast, they will touch you, they will call you a whore, and you just cross the street. You don't interact, because who are you going to go to? To the police? The police will treat you even worse.
As a woman and as a Jew?
As a woman and as a Jew. As a woman and as a Jew. So people like me who stayed there until the age of 16, it was a double yummy in that. And also you decided, all of us, not to tell our our father or our brothers, because they will want to defend us and they will be in trouble. So it was like this, as I say, this narrow road that you learn at an early age to walk through.
As I recall, one of the very few times you ever sat down and wrote an op-ed was after the Taliban returned to Afghanistan. And it was published, I think, in the Times of Israel or the Jerusalem Post. Why did you react so strongly when the Taliban came back to Afghanistan?
Yeah, I remember I was devastated. I couldn't sleep the whole night, and then I think at about 3 o'clock I wrote this article, because when you are a woman in this part of the world, I don't know how much the Western world will understand what you go through. Because you are a slave in a way, both way. You have to wear the burqa, like in Libya. I remember the Italians, when they came, they used to say, how can women look only with one eye? Because they had this thing, and only one eye, there's that. And they had all their head, and they covered one eye. So they were like this, being at home, not working. And we, the Western women, we were harassed because we were not wearing that. So the men were frustrated because they couldn't look at their women, but they were angry at us because they could look at us, but then to justify it, they will call us whores, prostitute, dogs. So you do if you win if you do.
You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
You're damned if you don't.
So again, I think it's important for everyone to understand, but most of the Jews left. They didn't trust the new Libya. They didn't trust the Constitution. They left, and most went to Israel. But your family stayed 16 years after the Constitution was adopted. And by the time 67 came, I think there were only about 4,000 or 5,000 Jews, from a peak of 40,000 Jews. Why did you stay?
Well, I don't know why my parents stay.
Why do you think? I mean, I know your parents are not allowed.
I think it's force of inertia. I think, we always hope things will get better. I honestly don't know. I mean, this is a question that you can ask a lot of Jews who stayed in Arab country, or the Jews that didn't live before the Holocaust, and some that they were smart enough that they left the moment they start smelling something bad. It's human nature. But those who stayed, for example, if you travel, somebody had to stay in the family. Because basically
someone had to stay back in Libya in order to ensure that you would return.
That you will return, yes.
So basically a family member was held hostage, which is the case, by the way, I think in Iran today with Jewish families, if anyone wants to travel abroad. Okay, so can we approach 67?
Yes.
Because 67 was the decisive year.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Well, first of all, everything blew up June 1967. But even a month before, we could hear something. The school closed. I remember walking with my sister, and young Arabs will do like this, like that, which is, is their modus operandi. I'm going to slice your throat. But the interesting thing is, when you look at, and this in a way, to me, it's symptomatic of why it's very difficult for the West to understand the Middle East, because it's such a complicated story. Now, Libya, where I lived, was number 6 in producing petrol. Plus, what was the population of Libya?
2 million, maybe. Very small.
So we had the boom.
I think the size of Texas with just a couple of million people and a lot of wealth.
We had the Willows, we had the American base, to show you how important. We had the British base. The Italian had a big influence. We went to Italian school. There is Italian fashion, everything. So Libya was this rich, cosmopolitan place. Forget how the Jews were treated. Okay. Egypt, at the border, was this very, very poor country, where I remember the rich Libyan will import labor from Egypt. It was like basically Libya was the United States, and Egypt was
Honduras.
No, the border, gli spagnoli. Mexico. Okay, to give you an idea, you all know what goes on between the United States and Mexico. The fascinating thing is that Nasser had this incredible...
Gamal Abdul Nasser was the president of Egypt.
Yeah.
And a very charismatic figure in the Arab world.
Yeah, Gamal Abdel Nasser. Yeah, sorry, I thought Nasser.
No, we have different generations.
Yeah, here I forget. So Nasser was the leader of Libya.
Of Egypt.
Of Egypt, sorry. And even though he was dealing with this country with what poor Peter, his dream was to have a pan-Arab nation under his tutelage. And so he had an incredible influence in the rest of the Arab countries, including Libya. So I remember as a child going to the movie where you saw in the
newsreels.
In the newsreel, you saw
young people may not even know what that is. Before the feature film, they would have like news clips from around the world,
yeah.
And then they show the feature film.
Sorry, I forget you're also young. Anyway, and we had, by the way, Libya was a kingdom. I forget to tell you. Libya was a kingdom until Gaddafi took over, and the king was Idris el-Senussi. Anyway, so you see the King Idris with his adopted son, and people will direct this. And then you see Nasser, and you see the movie, the movie theater, honest to God, will go to explode. Everybody, Nasser. And his thing, which I still remember in Arabic, Al-Adwan al-Siyoniyya, the Zionist enemy. This was what he wanted to this was his
way of building the pan-Arab unity.
Blame the Zionists. So things were boiling from the end of May, middle of May, in 1967. I mean, we couldn't go to school. As I told you, they will see us. And then finally, it blew up the 6th of June.
Right. The Six-Day War began the 5th of June. It was a 6-day war.
Yeah.
And that changed everything.
And that changed everything.
So for several weeks prior to June the 5th, as my wife suggested, and it went well beyond, the rhetoric from Damascus and from Cairo was the beating of the drums of war. There are any number of quotations from Syrian and Egyptian leaders saying, the day is coming, we will annihilate the state. And by the way, let's all remember that until that moment, there was no West Bank or Gaza in discussion. There were no settlements. It was simply Israel, this narrow 9-mile wide piece of land. And then several steps were taken under Nasser's leadership that called on the United Nations to remove the peacekeeping force that had been a buffer for 10 years since 1957. Then Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran, which was considered a casus belli, an act of war, because it prevented Israeli shipping from coming into the Red Sea to the Israeli port of Eilat in the south. And there were troop movements and lots of other things. On June 5th, having assessed that Egypt and Syria were ready to attack, Israel struck preemptively, and within a day had destroyed essentially the entire air forces of both Egypt and Syria, and in what many believe was a classic military battle. Within 6 days the war had ended, and this is how Israel came into possession of the issues we talk about today. Why is the West Bank in dispute? Why is Gaza in dispute? Why is Eastern Jerusalem in dispute? It all began in June of 1967 as a result of this war. In fact, if you look it up, the West Bank not only was not run by the Palestinians, but it was formally annexed by Jordan, which was only recognized internationally by Pakistan, as I recall.
Yeah. And the UK.
I thought it was illegal, the Jordanian annexation of
But
Jordan.
it was, I mean, that's why it was not recognized by others, but it formally annexed it.
Yeah.
But the annexation was only recognized by 2 countries in the world. Meanwhile, Gaza was under Egyptian military occupation. So again, there was no Palestinian sovereignty in Gaza either. Okay, so the war ends, Israel is victorious, but for the Jews of Libya, back to our theme, it's the beginning of the end. What happened?
So we woke up knowing that there will be trouble.
But by the way, I should add, how was the war reported to you in Libya during the war? This is interesting.
Yeah, I was going to come to that. So there is this group that attacked our house, my mother, my father, and us 8. And all I remember was this incredible group coming to our garden to kill us. And basically, I think the thing was they wanted to burn us alive because they had matches. And
were you a rich family?
No. They just came.
That's why there was no dowry in our wedding.
The first guy they killed actually was an assistant butcher that was trying to help. Anyway, so when they came to us, 2 things happened that saved our life. Number 1, my mother. We always tell my mother that she's a Taliban who thinks she's a Jew because she identifies everything in her. She's an Arab in many ways. And she had this incredible love for the Arabs to the day she died because she was one of them, even though she was Jewish. And my mother knew the psychology. So 2 things happened, the miracle. My mother pushed my father away and single-handedly confronted this mob. To me, they seemed thousands of people. And she said, why are you killing us? We are Arabs like you. We didn't do anything. We don't even know where Israel is. And the other miracle, which my mother always say, always be nice because you never know how you will meet these people. A guy that worked in the place where my father worked and was supposed to be fired, my father decided not to fire him and he came to work for our family. And he told them all, please don't do it, they are the good Jews. So I'm sorry, I laugh because the good Jews. So my mother always say, as a miracle, they put the thing inside, come si dice, the matches, and they left. Now we knew...
They left, but instead they attacked?
They left, but 1 second. And they killed other people, which thank God we didn't know. So what happened, my mother decided, we had a wonderful Arab guy, Abdul al-Baydarna. Bay means count or something, a wonderful man. And my mother called him and he said, look, if you don't come and save us here, these people left, but we could see them all over burning the places and everything. So this wonderful man sent his driver. We all dressed as Arabs, with the thing covering our head. And we lived in his house for about 2 weeks. 2 things happened, interesting. So we women lived in the women's side and my father lived in the men's side with the television and whatever. And one day I managed to to go from the women's side to the men's side. And I went and I saw my father watching TV, very relaxed. And I said, why you are so happy? He said, I didn't say why you're happy. I said, why you are so relaxed? He said, why? I said, because Mama is crying all day long. And he said, why is your mother crying? We're all here saved. And I said, because she's hearing the Arab news. And basically they say that Israel was completely destroyed, which by the way, if you talk to people from Egypt, etc., will tell you the same story. Israel was completely destroyed. There is nobody alive. And my mother had all her brothers in Israel and thousands of cousins. So my father told me, go to your mother and tell her not to listen to all this rubbish. I'm watching the BBC and the Italian news on the TV. And basically, Israel won, and the Egyptians are running without shoes in the desert. But basically, this is the first thing. The other thing is that my mother understood that she felt that country, she felt that people, and after 2 weeks, she went to my father and she told him, look, the friend who saved us, he was my father's age, maybe 50, he's a wonderful human being. His young children are buying all the anti-Semitic propaganda. We better leave because I'd rather die in our own house than here. So we left and we went to our house. And by then we discovered how many Jews were killed. And they told us... In Libya. And they told us basically, they came to our house and they say, you have two choices. You can leave. In the meantime, God bless him, the Italian ambassador decided that he needed to save these people. They couldn't tell us to go to Israel. Can you imagine? They would have murdered us. So the Italian ambassador walked away that Italy gave us political asylum to every Libyan Jew that wanted to go. And the choice was either to be in a camp where they will protect us in Libya, or to live with 30 pounds, which is the equivalent now of 30
Libyan pounds, not British pounds.
Yeah, Libyan pounds, which was strong at the time, but that's not the point. And one bag.
One suitcase.
Well, so we left with one bag and one suitcase. They came, I remember they picked us up with guns, etc. We were lucky.
So the Italians basically gave you safe passage out of Libya to Italy. Have you ever returned to Libya?
No, I have no desire.
By the way, one of my big mistakes in my early years of marriage was looking longingly at my wife and saying, I hope one day we can return to Libya and sort of visit your childhood. To which she said, it's going to be with someone else because it ain't going to be with me.
But anyway, that's it. So I went to Libya and then I met an American guy.
To Italy.
I went to Italy and...
8 years later we met. Okay, now, why do you think that no one knows this story? I don't mean in this room. Why does no one know the story? Or let me put it differently. How many people felt that this story was familiar to them, that they'd heard this story before, something comparable? 1, 2, 3, 5 people? So the vast majority of people never heard the story before. Why do you think, if I mention the Holocaust, even if you're not directly related to the Holocaust, my guess is most of you have seen films or read books or met survivors. Why do you think no one knows?
This is my personal opinion.
Only.
I think nobody knows our story because people love victims. And I'm very proud of that. If you follow the story of the Arab Jews who left, who were kicked out, ones who were kicked out was mostly a success story. You see, that's, I think, this is my opinion, the difference between us and the Palestinian. The Palestinian, whatever you know about what happened to them or not, they were basically used by the rest of the Arabs as victims. They whatever. I give you an example. We arrived in Rome 14 Juillet, funny, the 14th of July. 1967. The 16th of July, I went to work, me and all my sisters. The Roman Jews, they accepted us and they all gave us work. I remember working in a store, and to show you, we were in a way, even though we were not wealthy or anything, we were used to a kind of way of life that the second day the guy told me, you have to clean the floor. So I started crying. I went to my mother and father and said, I don't want to clean the floors. And my father said, if you work in a store, you have to clean you have to clean the floor. And I went back. But anyway, but we all work. And now if you go back, for example, to Italy, they open store, they create more economy for everybody. We never ask for help. Every country we went to, and I think including Israel, and I'm talking also about Iraqi, Jordanian, Lebanese, we were just grateful to the country that took us. We gave up on the country that kicked us out. Most of us, it's funny, I'm with a group of Libyan Jews like we have. Most of us, thank you, God, that we were kicked out. We are sorry for all of those who died. By the way, beautiful family, I knew them, 7 boys and 1 sister. They did, thank God, what they did, they had people, they think they were Egyptians, but whatever. They will come to the house of the Jews in Libya and they say, I'm from the police. And they will took them all on a thing and they will take them and kill them.
But they were not the police.
But they were not the police. I'm still friend to an Arab whose husband used to be the Minister of Interior. By the way, when Gaddafi came, he also was put in jail.
Gaddafi came in 1969, 2 years after this story.
And she told me how her husband came home crying, this man saying that he had to go into this kind of forest, seeing all this body, including a little girl that was still holding her doll. I mean, this is what they did. There was no pity.
You knew this family.
I didn't know them. They were not my best friend, but we knew them because, we were a small group. But anyway,
The question?
Is this in Libya or Italy?
No. We're talking only Libya.
Okay, I got it.
Italy is a great story of freedom, food, and us.
No, Italy is
It's the happy ending.
No, Italy.
No.
Italy is where we arrived, where they gave us political thing, which, by the way, political asylum. But things are not easy. I did not get an Italian passport until maybe 30 years after Italy. I mean, I already had my American, but still, and it was a struggle to go to work. But I will always be grateful to the Italian. If I had to, I always say, if you have to be a refugee, I don't know now, that is the most wonderful place, the compassion, the kindness, the wonderful place to be. So that was the place. And then from there, my family, I ended up in the States because I met David. 2 sisters went to Israel. One big Zionist went directly to the army. She was one they called lone soldiers. And one is in San Francisco and the rest are still in Rome. But this is the story of the Jews.
So just fast forward, and many of you will remember the image of Islamic State and the Christians in Libya who were lined up and blindfolded and, forgive me, with machetes, they were beheaded.
Yes.
You, as having lived in Libya as a minority years before that, what was your reaction to that image many years later?
If you follow the story of the Jews, that's why they call us the minor
canary in the mine.
Because they start with us and then they go to other people. I mean, they did a lot to the Italians too. And I don't think there are any more Italians there. They persecuted them. I don't know if they killed them. I don't know if they Libya, but nobody that I know. But yes, the Italians too, they were the second victims.
Because I remember you were saying to me, Juju, when that happened, they probably looked for the Jews in Libya first, and there were no Jews left.
They couldn't find them,
And when they couldn't find the Jews, the next target were the Christians.
Yeah.
So they lined up the Christians. Does everyone remember those images of the Christians on their knees and blindfolded? And then, and this is what my wife said, the Jews were first, but there were no more Jews. So who was next? The Christians, and perhaps next could be the African blacks, or who knows. Final thoughts before we open it up? What would you like this group to remember? There are going to be many presentations in these 2 weeks. There have been already great presentations. So we all sort of reduce each presentation to a few memories or thoughts. What would you like this group to remember from this conversation and your experience?
Well, I don't presume anybody to remember, but what is important to me is that what I learned, for example, is that our success became our our failure. And this is the problem, that nobody has the time to follow all the people history. So the stories that they touch us more are the stories that they're said, even if they're not true. So I think there should be more people like me to talk. By the way, I never wanted to talk. Until this morning I was fighting with him.
I can vouch for that.
I called my sister and I said I was blackmailed into talking. But anyway, no. So people should learn more. They should not just listen to what is said because it's said many times. And I mean, I really don't know what I can let you go home with. This is my story. You can multiply it by 1,000 times. I mean, it happened to all of the Jews in the Middle East. Most of the time, this is the tragedy. Honestly, we were there before even the Arabs were there. We are one of these people who have been there for millennia. And then we were kicked out. Nobody cared. Maybe we should have made. I was always thinking there was some of my friends, when we arrived in Rome, they were put in a camp in Capua. Capua is next to Naples. And now I was thinking, if we were smart, we should have let some of those people in camp and then said, look what happened to us. We left everything, we came, they kicked us out. But this is not our mentality. We are fighters. And we don't like to be victims, because being a victim doesn't help anyway. So I don't know, unless you can something to add, I don't know what.
How many Jews are left in Libya today?
No, none.
So again, just to summarize this and then open it to questions. The first Jewish presence in Libya, according to the historians and archaeologists, were in the Roman times. That means roughly 2,000 or more years ago. And at the peak, there were some 40,000 Jews in a country that was no more than 1.5 million or 2 million people. Again, one of these things we don't think about because we just kind of accept it as it is. The Arab presence in Libya was not indigenous. Arabs come from Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, which is 1,000 or more miles away from Libya to the east.
Yes.
So when we talk, and I'm not trying to make a political point here, just a historical, factual, contextual point. When we talk about the Libyan Arab Republic, its official name, or the Arabic language, we're talking about a 7th century invasion and occupation. And since those words are so charged today, I repeat, invasion and occupation that has lasted from the 7th century until today. The indigenous people were the Berbers.
Yeah, exactly.
The Jews came unwillingly as a result of the Roman Empire and the Roman control of most of the Mediterranean as early as 2,000 years ago. Today, there is not a single Jew left in Libya, and there's not even an effort to preserve any Jewish heritage or trace of the Jewish presence. The synagogues, I remember my mother-in-law crying not about the lost house or property, but the cemeteries, the buried relatives that she could never again visit or say a prayer for, that she was cut off.
And these cemeteries were destroyed. There were so bodies there.
We were told that the stones, we were told, were used for paving roads or whatever. So it's wiped out. Morocco's a somewhat different story, and there's an effort today to preserve and protect the Jewish heritage, and there are Moroccan indigenous non-Jewish groups involved in that. Even in Iraq today, David, there's a movement. It's not yet universal, but there's a movement to kind of recapture the spirit and the presence of the well over 100,000, David?
130, I think.
130,000 Jews, who were, by the way, I think about a third of the population of Baghdad at their peak, and so deeply involved. So I again, not to speak for my wife, she spoke so movingly herself, but to summarize this story, this was the result, and maybe we need to emphasize this, Juju. The argument often heard in the Arab world is, well, if it hadn't been for Israel, Jews would have lived very happily in Libya and there'd be no issue. Can you buy that argument?
Absolutely not.
Make the final point and we'll open it up. Why not? Why can't you buy it?
No, because they started even before the creation of Israel, because this is, I mean, it's almost endemic in the Arab world, at least the way I remember it. Maybe there were times when they were friends or whatever, but in the last, I will say, 70, 100 years, there was always this antipathy, for a lack of a bigger word, for the Jews.
And equality or inequality?
Absolute inequality.
Even prior?
Yeah, 100%, absolute. This is why people run away. And they absolutely.
And by the way, one could just also make the point, and then please, Jamal, one can make the point, even if Israel did exist, how does that in any way justify the destruction of a community 1,000 or 1,500 miles away that was living quietly in Tripoli or Benghazi or Misrata, that was not part of the Israeli Air Force operation, that was simply living its traditional life? So what if it was after Israel's creation? Does that lend credibility or validation to the end of a Jewish community, I think is the question. Absolutely. And with that, please.
I have a comment and a question. So I'm from the former Soviet Union. We also spent time in Italy, in Rome. And my question to you is, for Soviet Jews, my family, Russian-speaking Jews, we don't have a connection or like this, we don't want to go back. Where I speak with a lot of like Iranian Jews, and they have this kind of feeling of pride for Iranian culture. As a Jew from Libya, do you have that nostalgia or that love for the that's my, do you understand?
Yeah, it's thank you for asking that. Absolutely. I don't have nostalgia for the country itself or for my time there, but I still adore Arab music. Kulthum, you know Kulthum, yes. is an Arab singer that when I want to cry, I hear her.
By the way, who hated Israel, by the way.
Hated Israel, by the way, yeah. But still, in fact, there is anyway, we speak Arabic, my sisters and I, when we want to talk badly about him, Arabic is our secret language. The food, we still, my Jewish holiday are all this Arab food. And it's very, very interesting. I happened to go with David for a walk. We went to, I posti arabi dove siamo andati, Arab Emirate, and Bahrain,
Saudi Arabia.
And I felt so at home because wow. It's so funny because I mean, the Jews we assimilate. I mean, these were my people until they decided to kill me, and the culture was that, and so yes, I miss part of the culture. I miss the generosity and the kindness and the food and the music. But I have no desire to go. By the way, it's very interesting, Tunisia and Morocco. Now I'm not scared. Mm-hmm. My husband knew the ambassador in Tunisia who had this beautiful, he said, Juju, let's go. And I said, never, ever, ever I will go in an Arab country. Going to the Arab Emirate opened it a little bit for me.
But it took nearly 60 years, close to 60 years for my wife, and I was traveling a lot in
And
the
I would
Arab
feel
world.
claustrophobic
And I would
knowing
invite
you
my
would be there.
wife. She would never come with me until a year ago when she said, I'm ready to go.
Wow.
It was nearly 60 years, and when she went, all of this returned.
Thank you very much, Dave, for your summary of the 67 war. But I think especially in the younger generations, it's very hard to understand what an incredible transformation 67 was. That in the days before 1967, there was realistic belief that Israel would be annihilated. And three, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, attacked simultaneously with the intention of annihilating the state. People only debate whether or not it would have been a complete genocide of those who lived there, but the idea of the annihilation of the state was there. And I remember as a young boy, school stopped, the radio was on all day for almost a month. We didn't do anything but listen to the radio in classroom because there was a believing. And when the Israelis won, and it was one of the most dramatic military victories in history, right? I mean, when the Israelis won, it was a tremendous humiliation. It was a tremendous humiliation. So people in Libya were furious because it was just a tremendous. And then the last point about that, in terms of people talked about land and things like that. We talk about, you talked about the West Bank, but let's not forget Israel also took the Sinai during that war and returned for peace, right? Returned the entire Sinai, which is more land than everything else combined, far more land than everything else survived. And a right-wing government led by Begin said, for peace, we return the entire Sinai. And that's just a piece of that history that gets left out of the story of Israel's occupation and quote unquote unwillingness to give back land. There was a case where they gave back the land. One last point was, I think the only difference between my mother's experience, your experience, was that when the neighbors turned on their Jewish neighbors, there wasn't Israel for them to escape to. And I think that's the only reason it's not another Holocaust.
So I just want to say contextually here, Larry, again, many of you were either not born or were not old enough in 1967 to understand that when we speak about the political situation today, these calls for the annihilation of Israel came exactly 22 years after the Holocaust. Exactly. And for Holocaust survivors who were one of the pillars of the state of Israel, I mean, one of the building blocks of the Israeli population, well, one of the biggest building blocks were the survivors. The survivors, with very, very, very few exceptions, and I'll talk about my own story because I'm the child of two survivors on Thursday, were young. They couldn't survive otherwise. If they were in their 60s or 70s or 80s, they couldn't survive the camps. So those who survived the camps and made it to Israel were largely young. In their own lifetime, having survived the Holocaust, 22 years later, they heard, not in German this time, but in Arabic, we are going to annihilate the state, the Jewish people. And I think, again, for those of you who are studying or teaching about anti-Semitism, you have to understand that these fears of Jews are not theoretical or detached from reality. They come from immediate life experiences. The second building block of Israel were the Jews from the Arab world. And the third building block were the Jews who came from communist countries. And each of the groups experienced their own forms of persecution and suppression. And that's also why, to fast forward, anyone who wants to engage, I think, in a serious political discussion about today and the region, at least has to have some understanding of how Israel came into acquisition of the territories. Without that, I'm not saying therefore you reach one conclusion. You can reach 10 conclusions. But without understanding how Israel came into acquisition of the territories, as you said, Larry, there's no point in having a discussion, because then you'll simply believe that Israel, having nothing better to do one day, decided to go and attack neighbors and grab land and occupy land and settle land, and simple, clean, black and white, good versus evil story. More questions?
Are you feeling a sense of rising anti-Semitism in the U.S. right now?
We have to go over time.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do feel there is a lot of anti-Semitism, and honestly, it's not for this conversation. I think American Jews still don't know how to fight it. There has to be another way. I think we're too busy apologizing, and we have to basically go and fight it with.
But were you able to breathe a little bit more here?
Oh,
In the United States, I'm sorry, in the United States.
Not compared to Italy or
Yes,
Libya?
compared to Italy and Libya.
No, not compared to Italy. I
Not
always
compared to
I felt perfect in Italy, and there was anti-Semitism. But you see, what depends. In Libya, I had 100. In Italy, I had 20. And in America, when I arrived, I didn't feel it at all. Actually, I felt embarrassed that I was married to this American who always say, I'm Jewish. We were used to, don't say it. It's very funny, there are... If this was a comedy club, I will say that what is the definition of anti-Semitism? Is somebody who hates Jews more than usual. Or what the French philosopher who said, if the Jews didn't exist, the anti-Semite would have invented them. So you have to put all this, to me, all this goes under this hat. It's basically in our case, if you look at the history, if something goes wrong, the Jews did it. If something goes well, the Jews are too powerful. One thing that upsets me no end about the young American Jews is this sense of, I'm sorry if we are successful. And I'm saying we are a group that came, and I'm not showing off here. I mean, I'm fed up of being PC. If you follow the story of the Jews, wherever we went, I mean, I never forget, I didn't know that actually an African American in New York told me that about 10 years ago. I was with Josh's, and we were talking was something about the Nazi, etc. And I didn't know. And he said, do you know that the first orchestra in New York was created after the Holocaust because they had all these incredible musicians. So and the other thing, the comedian, the guy that committed suicide,
Robin Williams.
Robin Williams. He went to Germany and he said, he was in a comedy club and he said, people ask me why we don't have enough comedy club in Germany, and I answered, did it ever occur to you that you killed all the funny people? So it's I mean, you can make it into a funny way, but this is true. Wherever we went, after the Holocaust, after we were kicked out, after the Spanish Inquisition, we don't sit and then say, oh, I'm a victim. We go, we fight, we do everything. I mean, in Italy, people said, when I arrived in Rome, the Italians, they all own the store, the Libyan the Italian Jews. Do you know why they own the store? Because when they arrived in Italy, which, by the way, the Roman Jews are the oldest Jewish community in Europe. They were not allowed to do anything. The only thing they were allowed to do is to sell old clothes, old stuff. So what did they do? They start selling old stuff, and then they realized that with old stuff that they could do things until they become good merchants. So what we did is that we took a lemon and we made lemonade, as they say in America. I don't know if you say it in this country. And we are punished for that. And this is why sometimes I want to scream to the world. And to be honest, in my opinion, living in America, in New York, a very liberal place, the worst the worst people are some of the Jews, these young Jews that yeah, you can see a Russian Jews feel, I'm sorry if my daddy gave. You go to the hospitals, you go to every hospital in America, and unfortunately I had friends who were very sick. Everything this is donated by Weiss, this is donated by Friedland. 99% are Jews. You go to a museum and we have to feel embarrassed by it. You know, statistically, the Jews, less than 2%, they give 90% of charity. And we have to apologize. I mean, honestly, you want to scream. And this is to answer you. So maybe we should give all our money away. We should go back to the Nazi and tell them, please kill us again, and the world will be happy. But otherwise, I think
there's the sequel to the book. By the way, I'll be sleeping on the couch. I'm not; those percentages are not accurate, but they're meant to make a point about the giving, the generosity. But please don't write down those
They're
numbers.
accurate, they're not precise.
They're within the range of significant margin of error. Okay, we're going around the table right here, please.
It's funny with the 6-Day War, but then you look in this country.
Sure.
We had the 67 uprisings, which opened the way. It was kind of a turning point during the Civil Rights era for blacks. So, you know, it's just real interesting how all of these parallels are being documented through in a number of areas.
absolutely.
But 67 was a pivotal point
Totally.
Yeah, I
I told you it was.
for African Americans.
No, thank you for
Can I make
telling.
two just very quick closing comments, one serious and one light? I think this is why, for many American Jews, I think I speak for more than myself, the community that we have always identified with most in the United States is actually the African American community. And we could have a deeper discussion. And despite differences in the perception of race or color, I think the stories, at least as I was raised, were always focused on the commonalities and the shared responsibilities between the Jewish community and the black community. And it's gone through some bumpy times. And we need much deeper understanding, not only of the bumpy times, but how we overcome them and put them behind us. Because at the end of the day, as you said, sir, anti-Semitism and racism are both on the rise, and I would argue are both linked. Because I have no doubt, if you take, for example, the white supremacists who went into the AME church in Charleston, South Carolina, by the way, was invited in by the African-American worshipers, and who then killed 9 people. Had he not been stopped, and had there been a synagogue next door, I have absolutely no doubt in saying that he would have entered that synagogue as the white supremacists did in Pittsburgh, and he would have killed the Jews and believed that he was doing God's work in killing both the Jews and the African Americans. And I would add, by the way, that if there were a mosque next to the synagogue, he would have continued his spree. So any division between us only serves our common enemies. I mean, that's the headline. There's the longer. The light note, because I was raised in the 60s on American television, which always had happy endings then. Always. My 3 sons, Ozzie and Harriet, My Little Margie, we all had happy endings. The only issue where I disagree with my wife in a way is, had she not suffered the persecution of 1967, I never would have met her. So I'm in a dilemma. Should I be thankful there was the persecution, or should I be horrified that there was the persecution? But otherwise, our paths would not have crossed. Instead, 48 years later, here we are.